I was 15 years old when my father told me to step out of the car in the middle of a storm, and I learned that blood doesn't always mean protection. It had started as one of those picture-perfect Sundays my mother loved to post about, the kind with pot roast in the oven and soft music playing through the kitchen speakers while sunlight poured across the hardwood floors of our suburban Ohio home. My younger sister Madison sat at the counter, twirling a strand of her blonde hair and laughing at something on her phone, looking every bit like the golden child she had always been. I remember thinking how calm everything felt, how ordinary, and how I should have known that in our family, calm never lasted long. The shift came with a sound I still hear in my sleep, Madison's sharp intake of breath followed by the clatter of her purse hitting the floor. She stood there wide-eyed, her voice trembling as she said her grandmother's bracelet was missing, the one our dad had given her for her 16th birthday just a week earlier. Before anyone even asked a question, her eyes turned to me. It was subtle, just a glance, but it was enough. My father's expression hardened in a way that told me the verdict had already been reached. "Emily, what did you do?" he asked, not if I had done anything, but what I had done. I felt the air leave my lungs. I told them I hadn't touched it. I said it once, then twice, then a third time, my voice growing smaller each time I realized it didn't matter. Madison's lower lip trembled, tears gathering just enough to look convincing without smudging her mascara. My mother wrapped an arm around her shoulders and shot me a look filled with disappointment, the kind usually reserved for strangers on the evening news. Within minutes, my father had decided we were driving back to the mall where we'd been earlier that afternoon because he was certain I must have pawned it or hidden it somewhere along the way. Dark clouds rolled across the sky as we pulled out of the driveway, thunder rumbling in the distance like a warning I was the only one who could hear. Rain began to fall in heavy sheets, blurring the windshield as my father's knuckles turned white around the steering wheel. I tried again to explain, my words barely audible over the storm, but he cut me off with a single sentence that sliced deeper than the wind outside. "I can't believe you'd betray your own sister." Madison stared straight ahead, silent now, letting the lie breathe on its own. By the time the rain was pounding so hard we could barely see 10 feet in front of us, the car slowed to the shoulder of the road, gravel crunching beneath the tires, and I felt something inside me shift, a quiet understanding that whatever happened next would change the way I saw my family forever. The car came to a complete stop on the narrow shoulder of Route 17, rain slamming against the roof so loudly it felt like the sky was shouting over all of us. For a few seconds, no one spoke. The windshield wipers moved back and forth in a frantic rhythm, barely keeping up, and the world outside the glass looked washed out and unreal. My father turned slowly in his seat, his eyes darker than I had ever seen them. "Get out," he said. At first I thought I had heard him wrong. My heart thudded in my ears as I stared at him, waiting for the rest of the sentence, waiting for the part where he told me to cool off or walk a few yards and think about what I had done. But there was nothing else. Just 2 words, steady and final. My mother shifted beside him but did not argue. She did not even look at me. Madison sat in the back seat next to me, her face pale and composed, her hands folded neatly in her lap as if this had nothing to do with her at all. "Dad, it is pouring," I whispered, my voice shaking. I did not take it. He tightened his grip on the steering wheel. "You will not get back in this car until you tell the truth," he replied. The door handle felt cold in my palm. When I pushed it open, wind rushed in, carrying rain that soaked my shirt within seconds. I stepped out onto the gravel, my sneakers sinking slightly into the mud forming along the edge of the road. The door shut behind me with a heavy sound that seemed louder than the thunder above. For a brief, foolish second, I thought he would unlock it again, that he would realize how far this had gone. Instead, the red brake lights glowed through the rain, and then the car pulled back onto the highway and disappeared into the gray curtain of the storm. I stood there alone, the rain flattening my hair against my face, my clothes clinging to my skin, the cold seeping in faster than I thought possible in late spring. Cars passed every few minutes, their tires spraying water across the pavement, drivers too focused on the storm to notice a 15-year-old girl standing on the side of the road. I wrapped my arms around myself and started walking because standing still made the fear louder. Each step felt heavier than the last, not because of the rain but because of the truth settling in my chest. They had believed her. Not just for a moment. Not just in anger. They had believed her enough to leave me behind. I tried to replay the afternoon in my head, searching for something I had missed, some detail that could prove I was not crazy. I had not even touched Madison's purse. I had been upstairs finishing homework while she got ready to meet her friends. But none of that mattered now. The only thing that mattered was that in the space of one accusation, I had become the untrustworthy one, the disappointment, the daughter who could be left in a storm to think about her mistakes. Thunder cracked again overhead, and I realized that the cold I felt was not just from the rain. It was the understanding that even if they came back for me, something between us had already broken in a way that could not be undone. I kept walking because the alternative was standing still and letting the silence swallow me whole. The rain had soaked through my jeans and into my socks, each step squishing against the inside of my sneakers as water pooled along the edge of the highway. I wrapped my arms tighter around myself and tried to focus on something practical, like how far the next gas station might be or whether there was a farmhouse nearby. But all I could really hear was my father's voice telling me he could not believe I would betray my own sister. The word betray echoed louder than the thunder. It felt too big for what had happened, too heavy to belong to me. I had always been the careful one, the responsible one, the daughter who remembered birthdays and cleared the dinner table without being asked. Madison was the charming one, the one who could turn tears on and off like a faucet. And somehow, in a matter of minutes, those roles had become evidence against me. Headlights appeared in the distance, glowing softly through the rain. I stepped a little farther off the road, my heart racing, unsure whether I wanted to be seen or to disappear completely. The vehicle slowed as it approached, tires hissing against the wet pavement. It was an old blue pickup truck, the kind with faded paint and a dent along the back bumper. For a moment it rolled past me, and I felt a strange mix of relief and disappointment. Then the brake lights flared red, and the truck eased onto the shoulder about 20 yards ahead. My first instinct was fear, not of anything specific, just the fear that comes from being 15 and alone in a storm with no idea who might step out of that driver's seat. The door opened, and a tall man in his late 50s climbed down, holding a baseball cap against his head to keep it from blowing away. He did not rush toward me. He simply stood there, giving me space, rain darkening the shoulders of his flannel jacket. "Are you all right?" he called out, his voice steady but raised enough to carry over the storm. I hesitated before answering. I had been raised to be cautious, to never talk to strangers, but I had also been raised to believe my parents would never leave me in danger. That belief had just dissolved in front of my eyes. "I am fine," I said automatically, even though my teeth were starting to chatter. He studied me for a moment, then glanced down the empty stretch of road. "You do not look fine," he replied gently. "Where are your folks?" The question tightened something in my chest. I looked back toward the highway, half expecting to see our car returning with flashing hazard lights, but there was nothing except rain and passing traffic. "They left," I said finally, the words tasting unreal. He did not ask why right away. He did not accuse or judge. He simply nodded once, as if he had heard enough stories in his lifetime to know that family can be complicated. "There is a service station about a mile up," he said. "It is too far to walk in this weather. Let me give you a ride there so you can get warm and make a call." Every warning I had ever heard about getting into a stranger's vehicle ran through my mind, but so did the memory of red brake lights disappearing into the storm. I searched his face for something unkind and did not find it. What I saw instead was concern, quiet and uncomplicated. After a long pause, I gave a small nod and stepped toward the truck, not realizing that the choice I was making in that moment would soon force my father to confront a truth he had been avoiding for years. I climbed into the passenger seat of the old blue pickup truck, pulling the door closed with hands that would not stop trembling, and the sound of the rain instantly softened to a dull roar against the metal roof. The cab smelled faintly of motor oil and peppermint gum, and the heater clicked on with a tired hum that felt like the first kindness I had been offered all evening. The man adjusted the vents toward me without making it obvious, keeping his movements slow and deliberate as if he understood how fragile the moment was. "My name is Daniel," he said after a few seconds, eyes still on the road. "Daniel Whitaker." I nodded and gave him my name, my voice barely louder than the windshield wipers sweeping back and forth. He did not press for details right away. He simply drove, hands steady on the wheel, as water streamed across the glass in silver waves. The highway lights blurred into long streaks, and for the first time since my father had told me to get out of the car, I felt the tightness in my chest loosen just enough for me to breathe. About half a mile up the road, the glowing sign of a small service station came into view, its fluorescent lights flickering against the stormy sky. Daniel pulled into the lot and parked near the entrance. "Let us get you inside and dry," he said gently. The bell above the door jingled as we stepped into the station, and warm air wrapped around me like a blanket. The cashier, a middle-aged woman with reading glasses perched low on her nose, looked up in surprise at my soaked clothes. Daniel explained quietly that he had found me walking in the storm and thought it was safer to bring me here. There was no drama in his voice, just calm concern. The woman nodded and handed me a stack of paper towels from behind the counter. I pressed them against my arms and face, watching puddles form at my feet on the tiled floor. Daniel asked if I had a phone number memorized. I did. I knew my home number by heart, though the idea of calling it made my stomach twist. He guided me to the payphone mounted near the restrooms and stepped back to give me privacy. My fingers hovered over the keypad for a long moment before I began dialing. Each ring felt like an echo of the space that had opened between me and my family. When my mother answered, her voice sounded strained, almost breathless. "Emily," she said, as if she had not expected to hear from me. In the background I could hear my father speaking quickly, and Madison's higher-pitched voice overlapping his. I told her where I was. There was a pause, long enough for me to realize something had shifted on their end too. "We are on our way," she said finally, her tone different now, uncertain. I hung up and turned to find Daniel watching from a respectful distance. He gave a small nod, as if to say that whatever happened next, I was not alone in that moment. I did not know then that when my father walked through that service station door and saw who had chosen to help the daughter he had left behind, his hands would begin to shake for reasons that had nothing to do with the storm. I stood near the vending machines, wrapped in the thin warmth of the service station, watching the rain race down the wide front windows while Daniel Whitaker sat at a small table with a paper cup of coffee he had not touched. He did not hover, and he did not try to fill the silence with questions. Every few minutes he glanced toward the door, not impatient, just steady, like someone who believed that staying was the right thing to do. My clothes were still damp, and the air conditioner above the soda cooler made the chill settle into my bones, but I felt different now, less exposed than I had on the side of the highway. About 15 minutes after the call, headlights swept across the glass outside, cutting bright lines through the rain. My heart jumped before I could stop it. I knew that car. The familiar shape of my father's silver sedan pulled into the lot faster than necessary, tires splashing through shallow puddles. The engine cut off abruptly, and for a moment no one moved inside the vehicle. Then the driver's door opened. My father stepped out first, shoulders tense, scanning the parking lot until his eyes found me through the window. Even from a distance I could see the shift in his posture, the mixture of relief and something heavier. My mother climbed out next, clutching her purse tightly against her chest. Madison followed more slowly, her expression unreadable. The bell above the door rang sharply as they entered, bringing a rush of damp air with them. My father walked toward me quickly, stopping just a few feet away as if unsure whether he was allowed any closer. "Emily," he said, my name coming out softer than it had on the side of the road. I searched his face for anger and found confusion instead. Before I could answer, Daniel stood up from the table behind me. "She is safe," he said calmly. The moment my father turned and saw him, something changed in the room. It was subtle but unmistakable. My father's eyes widened slightly, and the color drained from his face in a way that had nothing to do with the weather. "Mr. Whitaker," he said, his voice losing its usual authority. Daniel gave a polite nod. "Richard," he replied evenly. I felt the air grow heavier between them, thick with history I did not understand. My father's hands, the same hands that had gripped the steering wheel so tightly earlier, now hung at his sides, fingers trembling just enough for me to notice. My mother looked from one man to the other, confusion knitting her brow. Madison shifted her weight, suddenly less composed than she had been in the car. "You know each other?" I asked quietly, the question slipping out before I could stop it. My father swallowed hard. "He was my foreman 20 years ago," he said slowly. "He gave me my first job when no one else would." Daniel did not interrupt, but his eyes remained steady on my father. "And you walked off that job without a word," Daniel added gently, not accusing, just stating a fact. Silence settled over us, broken only by the hum of the refrigerators along the back wall. In that stillness, I understood that this was more than coincidence. The man who had stopped in the storm was someone my father owed respect to, someone who had once believed in him. And now he was the one who had chosen to protect the daughter my father had left behind. I saw it then, the realization forming in my father's eyes, and his hands began to shake not from anger, but from the weight of seeing himself reflected in a moment he could not undo. The silence inside the service station stretched so long that even the cashier pretended not to watch us anymore. My father cleared his throat, but no words came out at first. He had always been the kind of man who filled rooms with certainty, who spoke in decisions instead of questions. Now he looked smaller somehow, like the storm had followed him indoors and settled across his shoulders. "Thank you for helping her," he said finally, directing the words to Daniel but keeping his eyes flickering back to me as if afraid I might disappear again. Daniel nodded once. "She should not have been out there alone," he replied calmly. It was not an accusation, but it landed like one. My mother stepped forward then, reaching for my hands. They were still cold, and when she felt that, her face tightened. "Emily, we were coming back," she said quickly. "We just needed a minute to think." I searched her expression, trying to measure how much of that was true and how much was an attempt to smooth over what had already happened. Madison stood a few feet behind them, arms folded loosely, her eyes darting between our father and Daniel. For the first time that night, she looked uncertain. Daniel glanced at me gently. "I think there is more to this story," he said, not to embarrass anyone, but because he sensed the tension humming beneath the surface. My father's jaw tightened. "Madison said you took the bracelet," he said to me, his voice softer than before but still firm, as if repeating the accusation might make it solid again. I shook my head slowly. "I did not touch it," I answered, meeting his eyes this time. Something shifted in Madison's posture. It was small, just a flicker of hesitation, but it was enough for my mother to notice. "Madison," she said carefully, "are you absolutely sure?" The fluorescent lights above us buzzed faintly. Madison swallowed. "I thought I left it on the kitchen counter," she said, her confidence no longer steady. "It was gone when I went back." Daniel folded his arms loosely, watching without speaking. My father ran a hand through his wet hair, leaving it disheveled. "We searched the house before we left," he muttered, as if trying to convince himself. The cashier cleared her throat from behind the counter. "You might want to check your car," she offered gently. "Sometimes things slide under the seats." The suggestion hung in the air like a lifeline. My father hesitated, then turned toward the door. "Come on," he said to Madison. They stepped back out into the rain while my mother stayed with me, her grip on my hands tightening as if she feared I would pull away. Through the glass, I watched my father open the back door of the sedan and bend down to look inside. Madison hovered beside him, her shoulders hunched. A minute passed. Then another. Suddenly my father straightened, holding something small and metallic between his fingers. Even from inside, I recognized the delicate glint of the bracelet. Madison's head dropped. My mother inhaled sharply beside me. When they returned to the service station, the storm outside felt quieter, but the truth inside felt louder. My father walked up to me slowly, the bracelet dangling from his trembling hand. "It was under the seat," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. He did not look at Madison. He looked at me, and in his eyes I saw the beginning of something heavier than anger or pride. I saw the realization that he had chosen to believe one daughter so completely that he had been willing to abandon the other, and that realization was just starting to settle in. The bracelet rested in my father's open palm like a piece of evidence no one wanted to claim. Water dripped from the edge of his jacket onto the tiled floor as he stood in front of me, his shoulders no longer squared with certainty but curved inward, as if the weight of that small silver chain had bent him. Madison stayed a step behind him, her mascara slightly smudged now, her earlier confidence dissolved into a tight silence. My mother looked from the bracelet to me and then back to my father, her expression shifting from confusion to something closer to regret. "It was under the seat," my father repeated, his voice uneven. He did not raise it. He did not try to explain it away. The truth did not need volume. It was already loud enough. I felt something strange in that moment. Not triumph. Not even relief. Just a hollow space where trust used to be. Daniel Whitaker remained near the small table, hands resting lightly on the back of a chair, watching without interfering. He had done his part. He had simply stopped for a girl in the rain. Yet his presence in that room felt like a mirror none of us could avoid. My father turned toward him slowly. "I should not have left her," he said, and it sounded less like a statement and more like a confession. Daniel met his gaze steadily. "We all make choices in storms," he replied. "The weather just makes them clearer." There was no anger in his tone, but there was something stronger than anger. There was disappointment. I saw my father absorb that, the same way I had absorbed his earlier disbelief. Madison finally spoke, her voice small. "I thought I dropped it in the house," she said quickly. "I did not mean for it to go this far." My mother looked at her sharply. "You pointed at your sister," she said, not loudly, but firmly. Madison's eyes filled with tears again, but this time they did not seem practiced. "I just assumed," she whispered. I noticed that she did not say she was sorry. "Not yet." My father closed his fingers around the bracelet and then opened his hand again, staring at it as if it had betrayed him personally. "I did not even ask you," he said to me quietly. "I did not even give you a chance." The words hung between us, fragile and late. I remembered standing in the rain, the sound of the car pulling away, the certainty in his voice when he told me to get out. That certainty had been the part that hurt the most. Not the storm. Not the cold. It was the way he had looked at me as if the story was already finished. "You believed her," I said softly. It was not an accusation. It was a fact. My father's hands began to tremble again, and this time he did not try to hide it. "I have always believed her," he admitted. The fluorescent lights hummed above us, and outside the rain began to soften, as if the sky itself was growing tired. In that small service station on Route 17, I realized that the shaking in my father's hands was not about the bracelet or even about Daniel standing there as a witness. It was about the sudden understanding that the storm he needed to face was not the one outside. It was the pattern he had built inside our family for years, and for the first time, he could see it clearly. No one spoke for several seconds after my father admitted he had always believed Madison. The words seemed to settle over all of us like a second storm, quieter but heavier. My mother slowly released my hands and turned toward Madison, her expression no longer protective but searching. "Is there something you need to tell us?" she asked carefully. Madison shifted her weight again, her arms no longer folded but hanging loosely at her sides. For the first time that night, she looked her age. I did not see Emily take it, she said, her voice unsteady. I just panicked when I could not find it. And when Dad looked at me, I knew he would believe me. So I did not correct him. The honesty in that sentence was small, but it was enough to change the air in the room. My father closed his eyes briefly, as if replaying every moment in the car. You let me leave her on the side of the road, he said, not shouting, just stating the truth. Madison's eyes filled again. I did not think you actually would, she whispered. That was the part that struck me the hardest. She had not expected consequences. She had expected protection. The kind she had always received. Daniel remained silent, but his presence seemed to anchor the moment, keeping it from unraveling into excuses. My mother drew in a slow breath. We have made this worse, she said softly, glancing between both of her daughters. We have been treating you differently. It was the first time I had heard her say it out loud. The fluorescent lights flickered once overhead, and outside the rain thinned to a steady drizzle. My father stepped closer to me, stopping at a distance that felt respectful rather than forceful. Emily, he said, his voice rough, I was wrong. The words were simple, but I could tell they cost him something. He was not a man who apologized easily. He was a man who fixed things with tools and plans and practical solutions. There was no tool for this. I should have asked you, he continued. I should have trusted you. I searched his face, trying to measure whether this was guilt or understanding. I saw both. Madison wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. I am sorry, she said finally, looking directly at me. I did not mean for it to go that far. I nodded slightly, because I did not know what else to do. Forgiveness felt too big for that moment. What I felt instead was awareness. A quiet realization that something fundamental had been exposed. It was not just about a bracelet. It was about how quickly blame had found me, how easily trust had found her. Daniel glanced at his watch and then back at my father. Storms pass, he said gently. But what you decide after them is what matters. My father met his gaze and gave a small, humbled nod. In that small service station on Route 17, with the smell of coffee and rain still hanging in the air, I understood that my family was standing at a crossroads. The bracelet had been found. The lie had been uncovered. But the real question was whether the pattern that led to that moment would finally be broken, or whether this would simply become another story we never fully addressed. And as I looked at my father's shaking hands finally growing still, I realized that whatever choice they made next, I would never again be the same girl who stepped into that car believing she was equally protected. We drove home in silence, the storm now reduced to a light mist that clung to the windshield like a fading memory. I sat in the back seat, the same place I had been earlier, but everything felt different. The space between us was no longer filled with accusation. It was filled with awareness. My father kept both hands on the steering wheel, his posture straighter than before, as if he understood that every small movement now carried weight. My mother turned around twice during the drive, asking if I was warm enough, if I needed the heat turned up, if I was all right. I answered politely, but something inside me had shifted into a quieter place. Madison stared out her window, her reflection faint in the glass, and for once she did not try to fill the silence with explanations. When we pulled into the driveway, the house looked the same as it had that afternoon. The porch light glowed softly, the curtains were half drawn, and everything appeared ordinary. But I understood that ordinary had changed. Inside, my father set the bracelet down on the kitchen counter as if it were fragile. He turned to face both of us. This is not just about tonight, he said, his voice steady but low. I have been unfair. The admission did not erase what had happened, but it marked the first time he had said it without defensiveness. My mother nodded slowly, tears gathering in her eyes. Madison whispered another apology, and this time it sounded less rehearsed and more reflective. I listened, not with anger, but with clarity. I realized that forgiveness is not a switch that flips on command. It is a process that begins with truth. That night, truth had finally entered the room. I went upstairs to change out of my damp clothes and paused at the top of the stairs, listening to the muffled sound of my parents talking quietly in the kitchen. Their voices were not raised. They sounded thoughtful, almost careful. I understood that the storm had exposed something we could no longer ignore. I also understood that trust, once shaken, does not immediately return. As I lay in bed later, the sound of distant thunder fading completely, I replayed the evening in my mind. The rain. The empty highway. The red brake lights disappearing. The blue pickup truck stopping. Daniel Whitaker standing steady when my world felt unsteady. My father's trembling hands when he saw who had chosen to protect me. I did not feel victorious. I felt older. Something in me had grown up in the span of a few hours. I knew my parents loved me. I knew my sister had made a mistake. But I also knew that love without fairness can leave scars you cannot see. That night did not end our family. It reshaped it. And as I closed my eyes, I made a quiet promise to myself that I would never again accept being the easiest one to blame, even if the people doing the blaming were the ones who were supposed to protect me.